So anyway, does anybody have any idea how many people a year are treated for mental illness? Any idea? Well, I do. I got the statistics. 43.8 million people. That's the size of California, the population of California, okay? Now, the only thing about this is, this figure's from 2 years ago. So they're not taking into effect COVID. COVID has put up another 5% of mental illness, if not more. And COVID is a different type of thing, and it touches each group of people a little bit different. I had a lot of teens through COVID. These kids were suicidal, they were depressed, they were anxious. I had an athlete that was academic, he was a 4.0, and he started in basketball and everything. He quit basketball and he was failing. That's how it affected these kids. And it's still affecting these kids, by the way, and adults. So it's been a real issue. I've seen a bunch of these people. When I started doing this about 10 years ago, I said to my wife, I'm going to do this maybe once a week, just, if people need me, whatever, the church, whatever. I'm now at 2.5 days, and I could do probably 5 days a week if I wanted to, but I don't want to. I'm an older guy, and I'm ready not to retire, but just to not do so much. So anyway, what do you think, from a mental illness standing, how many of these people really get treated every year?
10%.
41% of them don't get treated. How much do we spend on mental illness? $193 billion a year. But the thing about it is, they're picking up the people that already have a problem. We're not being proactive with this illness at all. I practice medicine. We were proactive about hypertension, heart disease, cancer, everything else. Mental illness it has a label on it. We don't have time. I have talked to the PAs, the doctors in my area that I treat. They tell me, I don't have time to do this. You need to help me out. You send me somebody, you have medication, because I did medication for 40 plus years. You can help me out with that, whatever you can do. The nurse psychiatrist in our local hospital, and the psychiatrist, by the way, we have a local psychiatrist that doesn't even practice in the hospital. He's in Florida. And he does everything by Zoom because he wanted to retire 5 years ago, and they can't find somebody. That's how bad our mental health system is in right now. You talk about a crisis, you talk about a pandemic, which it wouldn't be a pandemic, but healthcare is in real problems right now. We just lost 2 of our local therapists. The one retired because she wanted to ride her motorcycle, and I can understand. No, I can't understand a motorcycle. But the other guy retired because of compassion fatigue. You've heard of compassion fatigue? I'm sure Sherry has. This gentleman had been a therapist for so many years that what happened to him is he got a little bit too empathetic, too compassionate with his people, and it really drowned him. So I don't think he's coming back. These 2 people were people that helped me with my overload. I don't have anybody for an overload right now, so I put people in waiting blocks, so to speak. And I don't want to do that. I want them in, and if they really need to be in, I find them a spot. If my wife said it's okay, I'll do it. So, yeah. Suicide rates from 1999 are up 35%. That's staggering. And these are mostly teens, of course. We're not touching our teens the way we should. I know that this church, and talking to the choir here, I know they have a great youth group, River Church, all these other troops that are in this network. I know they're doing a really good job, but they can only see so many. They can only help so many. And my prayer is that somewhere along the line, and I know Central Pennsylvania Youth Ministry is really growing now. They're doing better, and they're growing. I'm hoping that helps. One of the other things that I wanted to talk about, a lot of things I want to talk, you said 6 hours, right? I had 6 hours. And I still don't and cover it all. What can the church do about this? Well, I don't think the churches are doing enough. And as I said, I'm talking to the choir here. I know you guys are because I work with you, and I know you're doing a great job, and I really appreciate you, all of you. But a lot of churches are not. A lot of churches are losing a lot of their folks. The congregation is leaving. They're watching Zoom or whatever. Maybe cartoons Sunday morning. I don't know. But they're not in church. So what I thought, and I've had a couple of people come up to me and says, well, what do you do? And I will tell them, I do things a little bit differently than maybe Sherry does and some of the other therapists that I talk to, because I have my medical stuff behind me. So when a person comes into me, one of the first things I do is I do a history, which I think a lot of therapists do, but I do a medical history. And you have to do a psychiatric history. If you've got bipolar in the family, you may be looking at a bipolar. If you've got schizophrenia, you may have. And by the way, when do you start to see schizophrenia?
Late teens.
Late teens. Oh, sorry.
That's what I was going to say. Late teens, early 20s.
Great, right. So these kids are a lot of times misdiagnosed. And some of these kids that do get into the system that I have seen have 4 or 5 diagnoses till they're 18. And they're on so much medication that you can't tell one from the other. And one of the things I do with some of the doctors, I will call them up and ask them, to retest them or try to cut down on their medication, because when you're trying to do therapy with these kids and they're on all this medication, it's a real battle to help them. So what can churches do? A team. Ted and I have been talking about this for years, about a team. You guys have a team. I guess I'm part of your team. Who's Janie?
I'm back here.
Okay, I guess I am. But anyway, the team consists of professional people, non-professional people, but one of the most important groups of people in this are you lay people. You lay people are scared to death to go in and talk one-on-one to somebody because you're concerned you'll say something stupid or you'll do something wrong or whatever. But you're the people, you're the mentoring group that sits across from these people. And I will tell you, most people just need to talk. Some need to be diagnosed, some need to have medication, some have demons. That's when I send them over to Janie. All this type of thing needs care. But we don't have enough people out there to help. So you lay people, get educated, get whatever you need to get in front of these people. And you don't have to have a medical degree. You don't have to have a therapy degree. You just have to have a heart for Jesus. Mm-hmm. And I've been saying this in my church too. And I've been explaining this module to my pastor, and he says, well, tell me about it. So I hope I get him excited, because if I can get people that are be dedicated to do that, because, hey, as Dr. Phil would say, I'm long in the tooth. I don't know how long I'm going to be doing this. So we need groups of people to do this. One of the other things I wanted to talk about is PTSD. I see a lot of complex trauma, particularly in females, complex sexual trauma. And 1 out of 4, they say, I think it's 1 out of 3. There's a lot of sexual, emotional, and every type of abuse with young women and older women. And the bottom line is with them, they need special care. And these people need to have probably a therapist, and probably a female therapist if they're around, not always around. So when I was practicing medicine, I was doing a lot of this in my medicine because that was part of my history, to see if they had ever been raped or had sexual abuse or any type of thing. So, if you look at this crowd here with abuse and different things, 1 out of 3 or 4 of you have some of this. And it doesn't have to be to that far. It's a complex trauma. You've had some sort of trauma going on. And what I would tell you, if you're dealing with something, get some help so you can be effective. That's the thing with people. If you're carrying some sort of abuse and you're running into somebody with abuse, it's very difficult. And if it's the same type of abuse, it's very difficult for you to be able to help that person. So if you've had some issues along the way, and we all have, I went to a psychologist, I went to a Christian psychologist for a while because I had compassion fatigue. I was seeing too many people a day in medicine. doing house calls, I was doing everything, trying to raise a family, trying to pay bills, and it got to me. So I raised my hand and said, I need to see somebody, and it helped greatly. So my message to churches, and I say I'm talking to the choir, each one of you, if you touch one person, and get them help. Now, the other thing that I do is the 12-step for addicts. In my spare time, I do that. And we had 12 steps, which is Christian-based. It's like AA, but it's Christian-based. And what I see with this is every type of addiction. And what you would maybe not believe, but most of my men right now that I'm seeing have pornography issues and sexual addictions. They say 70-some%. I think it's a lot higher than that. My men that do have alcoholic issues usually have a pornography problem. So what we're seeing in therapy now is people with 2 or 3 addictions, along with being depressed and anxious and causing all kinds of problems in their family. So, any questions to here? Anybody have a question? No? I don't want to speak too much. I want you guys to ask questions too. So, if we talk about a depressed person, and about everybody that walks through my doors has some depression, we talk about people that probably have substance abuse, anxiety disorders, people with OCD, eating disorders, and all sorts kind of things. I don't want you lay people to sit back there and say, oh my word, all this stuff is walking through my door and I don't know how to handle this. Well, what you do is you have to create a trust, and that's what I do in my first 2 sessions. I create a trust, particularly if I'm dealing with a female, particularly if I'm dealing with somebody that doesn't know me. People in Juniata County, most of them know me. I don't know if that's good or bad, but they usually do. But the big issue with that is getting a trust issue settled, and then they will speak and they will talk. Then you can decide, what do I need to do with this? Do I need Janie to see this person? Is it a medication problem? And that's what I help these churches with a lot of times, is medication and some therapy. Is it a suicidal type thing? Now, I will tell you, what you will hear from a lot of people is, yeah, I want to die. So you ask them, do you really want to take your life, or you just don't want to be here? And a big percentage of them will say, I don't want to kill myself, I just don't like where I am right now. That's a difference. And the reason I say that, and I know that's, if I have someone that I'm very comfortable with, I won't send them up the road. If you send some of these people into the 7th floor, they'll come out with PTSD. I guarantee you. These places, these facilities have crack addicts, they have schizophrenics, they have really bad bipolars, they've got people that are really bad. And you put people in the 7th floor, and I know that's another thing with our health care, mental health care. Where do we put these people? Well, most of the people that we deal with don't belong in that type of environment, but that's where they go. So I'm treating 2 of my people that I sent to the 7th floor because they were sort of suicidal. Now I have to go through PTSD for them. And there are specialists, and I'm not one of them, in PTSD. So if you have an issue, there are people that do specialize in PTSD. I started by saying, how do I work up a client? I do want to go over that a little bit. You have to go over their health record. You have to go over their mental health, their family history. You have to go over anything that's in that family that was, somebody committed suicide, or somebody was bipolar, or somebody was schizophrenic, abuse of any kind. What we have to look at, we are born into this world, we're born into sin. I know Adam and Eve screwed it up. But the bottom line is, when we're born into this world, we have a clean slate, pretty much, other than born into sin. And we as parents sometimes will write things on these kids' clean slates. And that's what I'm seeing a lot of. When I take a history, my dad never loved me. He beat me. My mother didn't like me. She didn't hug me and kiss me. She didn't read stories for me at night. She told me I was too fat, I was too skinny, I was too stupid, I was too whatever. And I know you guys, I can see your faces, I know some of you probably have had that. And that is huge when I'm talking to somebody. Because if somebody fumbled the ball when you're a kid, these kids are always dealing with it. And I'm not the best parent, believe me. I messed up, I was working all the time. And I have apologized to my 3 boys for a lot of different things. They're in their 40s and 50s now. But I do apologize for the things that I didn't do. But when you find something like this with an adult, usually an adult, you know that you have issues that you're going to have to deal with. It's unforgiveness, it's anger. And by the way, what is the big emotion that drives mental illness? Somebody yell it out.
Fear.
Would somebody say?
Fear.
Good. It's fear. And what drives fear into what? Into anger. And what drives anger into what's next? You know, you name it. All the emotions there. So when I get a lot of my clients, what I'm dealing with is somebody with all these different issues. A lot of them feel abandonment. There's no trust issues. They don't have good relationship issues, so they all get divorced 3 or 4 times. They can't, and I say to them, I'm sitting there and I'm saying, you know, this isn't your fault. It isn't all your parents' fault. It's some of your parents' fault. But what we have to do is we have to instill trust. We have to instill some things here that have been missing when you grew up. Because sometimes I'm looking at a 35-year-old person, and what I'm actually seeing is a kid that never got treated right. And these are the people you can help. These are the people that shouldn't be on a lot of medicine. They look like they're majorly depressed and they're majorly anxious. But some of these people just need to talk and do some forgiveness type thing. And I know you guys have forgiveness programs here. And once that's done, and it has to be done right. It's not, yeah, I forgive my dad, it's fine. This has to be through the Holy Spirit. And it has to be the type of forgiveness that God has led you into. And you've got to hit it with some scripture and you've got to say, yeah, on my knees and I'm tears everywhere. And then you write a letter or you go face to face with the parent if he's still living. And that is one of the biggest things that I deal with, is that type of a relationship. Let me give you some case presentations, because I always loved that when I was in medical school and PA school. It just gives you a little bit of idea of what I see. I had this 61-year-old male that was referred to me by his healthcare professional for depression and anxiety. And I knew this guy because I know everybody in Juniata County. Most of them speak English, some of them don't speak English, I don't know so well. But, so he came into me and I took a history. Couldn't find anything in the past history, couldn't find anything that was really made sense to me. So I did some medical questions. Now, I said, well, I think we're barking up the wrong tree. I don't think you need medicine, I think you need a CAT scan. So I called his doc up and I said, you know, I think he needs a CAT scan. She said, why? I said, I think he has a brain tumor. Because he wasn't walking right, his speech was a little off, he had some different things with immediate memory and stuff, just some things that you think that part of the brain was affected. So he did a CAT scan, he had a brain tumor, glioblastoma. He was dead in 6 months. But nothing anybody could have done about that, because I mean, he just started the symptoms. But those are the things. I'm not trying to get you lay people nervous. You know, you won't probably ever see a brain tumor, but since I was in medicine, that, you know, I could pick that up. Talking about a 41-year-old female that came into me to talk to me before her husband came in, because he's the one with the problem. And I want to talk to you a little bit about social media affairs. They are worse than actual affairs. I'm seeing more men with that than I am with the physical sexual affairs. And I'm seeing that the 2 or 3 guys I have now are all Christians. They know better, but they got hooked. So anyway, this gal came in to talk to me about her husband, or it was actually a boyfriend, about his social media affair. And after talking to her, I could see her legs moving, I could see I couldn't get eye contact, and I look at the bodies, I look at the face, I look at the body language, I look at whatever. A lot of your information is right there. If I don't get good eye contact, I know I got probably some trust issues, probably some shame and blame, guilt, whatever. So I said, okay, I'll work with your husband. I'll get him on the 12-step program, but what's going on with you? I'm fine. I'm good. I said, I'm not trying to get another client here, but I think we should talk a little bit. She said, okay. So we talked a little bit, and then I got her back, and I did some testing, majorly depressed, major anxiety, and I want to talk to you about anxiety because everybody has anxiety, but I want remind me to do that, Ted. Anyway, going through her history, we got her on Prozac and we got her on Buspar. I called the doc up and I said, we need this because she can't focus. She can't focus, she can't get her work done, she's in healthcare, she needs help. So we got her on Prozac and we got her on Buspar. Buspar is an anti-anxietic, which is not habit forming. It's not a benzo like Xanax and Ativan, the feel-good stuff. So she came back, a couple sessions, really good. She wasn't depressed anymore, wasn't anxious anymore. So I said, there's something wrong? And she said, well, I still can't focus very well.
What?
I can't focus. Can you hear me back there? Am I sort of dying out?
Yeah, 99.9%.
That's good. I never got a test score like that, I know that. So I said, let's do another test. Let's do an AD test, ADD. This gal failed this ADD test worse than probably anybody I've ever had when I was practicing medicine. So I sent her back to her doctor and they got her an Adderall. And I hate to put people on medicine, but now she's so good. She feels better, she's sleeping, she's focused, she loves life, she spends time with her kids. It's just a different thing. So medicine does have a role in a lot of people and some people. And I know I had a devout Christian the other day in my office sitting across from me and said, you do not prescribe medicine. I said, no, I can't. I don't have my license anymore. But you're not going to suggest it. I said, we'll see. Let's talk. So I went over his history. We talked about different things. I did that mini depression scale, and anybody can do that from 0 to 10. How's your last 2 weeks been? 0 is the worst, and 10's like the first day of Christmas, and you're getting presents and so on. She said, well, I guess I'm about a 3. I said, oh, how long's that been? Oh, probably a couple years. He's married, he has a couple kids, he's a Christian, he's all this sort of thing. I said, well, tell me about your family history. How's mom and dad? Well, mom and dad, they've had some problems. They've been depressed. They've had some anxiety, whatever you call it. They've had some of that stuff. So I said, okay. So now I get into the brain, and I love the brain. Does everybody like to talk about the brain? I could talk to hours about the brain. Anyway, I said, now what you have to understand, when you get chemically depressed, I don't care if you have the best therapist, if you have Dr. Phil or whoever across from you, it just ain't going to work. What we're going to have to do is talk about medication, and I want you to listen to me. When you're driving down the road and your car's out of gas, what happens? He said, it doesn't go. I said, you aren't going, are you? You're sort of stalled. You're not going anywhere. He said, yeah, pretty much. I said, so your serotonin, that's a chemical. That's on a receptor that gives you serotonin, makes you feel better. Genetically, if mom and dad had some of this, or grandparents, it's a possibility you're going to have it too. So you're not going to be making serotonin the way you should. So I said, I don't care how good I am at this, you're not going to get better until you talk to your doctor about putting you on some medication. Anxiety is sort of the other way. So I do an anxiety test. I say, okay, 0 from 10. If 10 is the worst, it's a day that, a bear was chasing you or something, and 0 is nothing's going on. He said, well, I'm about an 8 or a 9. I said, okay, what's going on? This is chemical. So every day you get up, what are you thinking about? Oh, I'm thinking about work, I'm thinking about bills, yeah, I said, okay. So that's your thoughts. So what's going on? You're pouring out steroids and you're pouring out adrenaline. So what happens? Your blood pressure gets up, your pulse rate gets up, and you're already defeated. The rest of the day is going to be terrible for you. So when you get those two very mini tests, I've got longer tests, but those are the mini tests, and I can sort of get an idea. And if people are honest with you, you'll get a pretty good idea if they're anxious or depressed. So this is one of the ways I go if I think somebody needs medication. So not everybody does need medication, but there is that sometimes. Of course, you have to advise them that there's side effects, and not everybody gets better on medication. I have one client that I've had about everywhere, and what we've come up with is she's one of these persons that the medication just cannot hit these receptors the way they should, so the medicine doesn't do any good. So the only thing that's going to help her is probably therapy, and that's unfortunate because she's majorly depressed. But there are people that it doesn't work, so it can be an issue. So what's the other things that I look for when I'm talking to somebody? And I'm talking about their thoughts and their feelings. We all talk about thoughts and feelings. You know, you get up in the morning, what do you think about? Well, you might look out the window. My wife and I look out the window, we look at our birds, and we look at the flowers that are still alive. And, you know, it's a beautiful day. It's, you know, the sun's, it's partly cloudy too. And I said, well, it's partly sunny. It's not partly cloudy. Everything's positive. But some people will get up and it's about the guy, they'll talk about how bad things are going to be. It's like negative thinking, okay? Negative thinking produces a wiring in the brain that goes straight to the part of the brains that you couldn't feel good if you hit a home run in the World Series. It's just, it gets you in so negative that everything you look at, everything, and you can know people like that. You know, everybody knows people like that. So what I tell them we have to do, and there's good books on this, I should have brought my book about rewiring the brain. It's cognitive therapy, what they call cognitive therapy. So what I have to do is to try to find something positive in their lives. They have kids, they have a lovely wife, they have a good job, they have whatever. And what we do is rewire the brain with positive stuff. And if people don't journal for you, you might as well kick them out the door because journaling is so important. That's where my information comes from. And I tell them, I'm not going to read your journal. I don't read particularly girls' journals. I won't do that. But I want you to bring it along. We can discuss your thoughts and your feelings. Back to thoughts and feelings. You get up in the morning, you have a thought. And you wait a while. Now it's a feeling. Now I'm feeling it. If it's a negative, I'm getting adrenaline. And all of a sudden, it's into that midbrain where anxiety and adrenaline and the steroids going. This is why a lot of people can't sleep at night. They come off a double shift. These poor nurses that have been in the COVID thing, oh my goodness, I talked to some of them, and some of them are still dealing with that, is that, you know, they still can't sleep. They got PTSD too, by the way. PTSD, you don't sleep very well. You got nightmares. You're thinking about the incident that happened or the things that were just terrible. I was coroner for a while in my spare time, and I saw some cases that I said to myself after I was done drawing the blood and talking to the family and so on, these were car accidents and there was a burn victim and so on. I said, God, you and I need to have a talk because if I'm going to keep doing this, I can't go to bed and not get sleep because I got to get up at 6 o'clock in the morning and go to work. So this is something you have to take from me because if I see these images, I'm going to have a problem. So from that point on, I didn't have any problem at all doing the corner cases, although I felt very bad. I had to pick up a couple of young girls off the road that were killed, that were drinking and were killed on the highway, and I knew them. They were my patients, and Mom and Dad were my patients, and I had to knock on the door and say, your daughters are gone. So I did that for a little bit, and I decided that was enough. So when we talk about the brain, I always describe it as a computer. Now I know God made it, and, you know, that's one of the first conversations we're going to have when I get to heaven is, I want to know how you develop this brain and how it works the way it does and how it doesn't work in some people because they don't seem to have a brain. Well, it works in some people, and why you didn't give me all mine that I needed. But what I know of, which is about that much about the brain, is that we have these different areas in our brain that do different things. And I talk to the addicts, particularly my pornography guys, is that that part of the brain that it affects is the same part of the brain that heroin hits. And I call this the empty bin syndrome with my guys. I said, you sit in front of this pornography, you do your thing, you look at it, and you got an empty bin. All you can do is do more of it. It's never enough. And you're not even pouring off that oxytocin, which is tocin, excuse me, not toxin, tocin, is the chemical that we get when we make love to our husbands or wives. That fills the bin. We're holding each other, we're loving each other. It's a physical touch and different things. That's when you're filling the bin with pornography and viewing and social media. As I said, social media has become one of the things that has become a real problem. And the way I deal with people with social media is I do my 12 steps, because we have to look at pride, we have to look at guilt and shame. What's the difference between guilt and shame? Well, somebody's going to answer this, or I'm going to sit here for a half hour. What's guilt?
You're doing something you shouldn't be doing. But
Excuse me?
You're doing something you shouldn't be doing, but it's not necessarily condemnation.
Okay, so what's the difference with shame?
Condemnation.
Condemnation. Okay, good. So those are the things with a lot of people that I deal with as a guilt and shame issue. And, I think about guilt as, when you're in a trial and the judge says you're guilty of that, that's guilt. And shame is more your perception of what you've done. And a lot of times this is guilt and shame with my pornography addicts. And what we have to do is this is where Jesus comes in, and forgiveness. And I say, your wife isn't going to forgive you for 5 years probably, but Jesus already has. You've been on your knees asking for forgiveness, but with your wife it's going to take a while. The trust issue's going, and most of these women have no idea. They have good marriages. They don't check their husband's phones. They think everything's okay in the bedroom, and everything, conversations, communication, so on and so forth. But what we have to do is work through that, the guilt and the shame. And I want them to feel the guilt. I want them to feel the shame. I want them to know this was terrible. I want them to know not to ever do this again. I want them on track with Jesus. So with the 12 steps, it brings out a lot of pride. It brings out a lot of the things about why they did this. I've got 2 of my guys that their father started them on pornography when they were 8 years old. So talk about the brain changes. These are brains that are not formed until you're about 22. Your brain is still there. I'm 70-something. Mine's still trying to form, I guess. But anyway, this is the one thing that happens is the brain isn't formed and it's damaged. It really, you can do CAT scans on people that have OCD, bipolar disorder, and some of the other disorders, and you can see it on CAT scans. But not the CAT scans we get. These are $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 scans, and none of us can afford them. But they can actually see these things, these changes in the brain. So what that tells everybody is, yeah, this is damaging the brain. So if you're doing pornography, or if you're doing alcohol, if you're doing drugs, it changes the brain. And I've had numerous marijuana people, because now you can get medical marijuana if you have anxieties. And I don't know what you guys feel about marijuana, but if we get marijuana in Pennsylvania, stop driving. Don't get in your bicycles, stay off the road, because they're seeing this everywhere where this has been legalized. It's horrible. Colorado governor can tell you all about that. There's a state cop back there. He can tell you about it. I'm worried. I would worry more about marijuana than I would alcohol, because this marijuana is right now is a problem, right, Adam? It's a huge problem. So some of them are doing alcohol and marijuana. So some of them are really, and you can't test for marijuana with a breathalyzer, right? No, that doesn't work. Marijuana changes the brain. Everybody hear me? Marijuana changes the brain. It's a gateway drug. I don't care what this guy running for Senate tells you that wants marijuana. It's crap. We don't want it in Pennsylvania. Everybody here needs to go and vote. I won't tell you how to vote. I guess I already did that. But marijuana changes the brain. And I had a young man that he has a at-home job, and he's on his computer, and he's smoking all day. And I said, how do you get your job done? He says, well, it's much of a routine, and I can do that. And I said, well, aren't you in a fog? He says, yeah, but it's a good fog. I said, do me a favor. Let's try a couple weeks. And people that go off marijuana, they don't have to go slowly. They can stop it all at once. He stopped it, and he came back. He said, I did stop it. He said, I've never thought. He said, I started this in high school, and he said, I've been doing it ever since. And he said, I am so clear thinking right now. I'm going back to college. He said, I knew I couldn't do it the way my brain was. But he said, I found out that my brother has a marijuana problem too. And I said, well, you need to share that with him also. But these things with the brain and the way the brain changes, the brain can fix. But the problem is the longer you go with this, I mean, it just changes things. I mean, some people are being misdiagnosed because of the way their brains are right now. If you're on alcohol a lot, you're on marijuana a lot, you're on that kind of stuff, some of the diagnoses that they're getting, I don't think is really fair. What are the effects of mental illness? Anybody? It's my girl back there that answers the question. She's asleep, but that's okay. Okay, I'll answer it. Effects of mental illness. Either it leads to addiction or addiction leads to mental illness. It's one or the other, but effects of mental illness can be addiction, loss of motivation, poor sleep, fatigue, losing relationships, losing jobs, intimacy with God and spouse, feeling I've lost my salvation. And I can't tell you how many Christians have come into me and said, you got to tell me whether I lost my salvation or not. I said, I got to tell you whether you accept Jesus into your heart, right? Right. You know about the cross, the thing that you know about the cross. Yeah, I know about the cross. Okay. Do I have to go any further? I just don't feel good enough anymore. I said, well, none of us really are good enough. It's only through Jesus that gets us there. So the effects of mental illness can be all of this, and I think there's probably 20 or 30 more things. If these people aren't taken care of, if they aren't treated properly, if they aren't put on medication when they have it, they don't get some therapy, if they don't have church members that put their arms around them and love on them. And I know Janie and this church have had many unlovable people, because I've seen them in my office, and they're difficult. But they need to be loved too. And once they know that there's somebody there for them, it changes, and that's what our churches aren't doing. Churches are just not stepping to the plate and doing the things that we need to do. And this COVID has really spoke to me in a lot of different ways, with just the fact that people aren't coming back into the church. I look at some of these churches and they're half full now. They're half empty. I'm always positive, so I half full. So half empty. But that just changes things, and a lot of people have come with mental illness because of COVID. They have so much fear. You can see these guys out and about with their masks on. Don't touch me, don't come near me. I'm a medical person, and I watched a lot of television when this was going on. I wanted to understand this, because even when I had people explain it to me on TV, I still didn't understand it. I still was confused where this came from, what it does to you, and I think everybody should get their injections, because I think that's the only thing that we have. We don't have anything else. And if we get another real bad outbreak, which I don't think we'll get, I think the way this thing was created in China is it would just set off more and more viruses, which it's doing, but they probably won't be quite as bad as what we've seen with the COVID-19. But anyway, that's one of the things I do with my patients too. They all get blood tests. If they haven't had blood tests, they go to their doctors. If they haven't had their colonoscopies, if they haven't had their shingles shot, if they haven't, I talk to them about all this stuff. Because the way I feel is if I'm going to do this, I want to make sure that they're physically healthy too. I picked up a couple thyroids. That has a lot to do with your emotional stability and why you don't feel good all the time and why you don't sleep well and why this and that and the other thing. I picked up some people with very high cholesterols because they hadn't had their cholesterol done for 10 years. So one poor guy that hadn't had a PSA for his prostate done, I got him to get his PSA done and it was very high and he probably has prostate cancer. Now I know the medical doctor should have done this, but he should have asked for it too. And by the way, be your own advocate. I know I'm Ted's advocate. He always calls me, hey, I got this. What do you think? Yeah, it's okay. But you got to be your own advocate. That person sitting in front of you has been overworked, has one thing in mind is to see so many people, get you out the door and get the next person in. And if you think about it, they're sitting at their computer, they don't even touch you anymore. They're just sitting there at their computer because they have to satisfy their computer. And that's how they get paid. And I won't pick on any particular healthcare system. I won't do that. So what can cause mental illness? Anybody? Yell at it. Or don't. Hello? Is everybody sleeping? Pauline, you sleeping?
Trauma. Trauma.
Stress.
Yeah.
Trauma.
Trauma? Yep.
Abuse.
Yep. Abuse?
Fear.
What?
Fear.
Fear? Yep. So, mental illness comes from a lot of different things. And one of the things I really hang my hat on is genetics and DNA. Because if I've got somebody sitting in front of me that has parents or grandparents with mental health issues, this may be coming from them. And those that I found that way, I'm always a person that tries to be a cheerleader with my clients. I did that with my patients. You can't be judgmental, and I tell them the first session, I will not be judgmental. I'm here to help you. I'm not here to judge you. You have an alcohol problem, you have a pornography problem, you have a social media affair. I'm not going to judge that. That's judged by Jesus, and I'm not Jesus. And what we're going to do is work through that so we can put that behind you. So what happens with mental illness is you come in with either a genetic, fear, trauma, whatever, and what happens to you is you have that pattern in your brain that creates the type of thing that will create depression, anxiety. It creates OCD. Does anybody here know anybody with that OCD? Don't know anybody? Obsessive compulsive disorder. These are the people that look in their drawers and everything is straight, and everything is straight. You look at it in the clothesline and everything. I guess nobody hangs clothes out anymore. But they are some of the most interesting people, but they have all these rituals. And I've caught people sitting in they're doing this. So what are you doing? You can't? Well, you can't. Well, no, I just can't. And they look up here and they'll count all the ceiling tiles. I said, well, how many you got? And he said, well, I think you got 15, 16 tiles. They do this to allay stress. This is one of the things they do so they don't have stress. I had a young girl that every day she would check herself from head to toe to make sure she didn't find a lump or a mole or something. And she'd been doing that for 3 years. And she was so frustrated she didn't know what to do. Plus she had so much fear, we talk about fear, that she's going to find something. So what you have to do is you have to work through these compulsive disorders and try to get them to the point where they trust, and this is all Jesus. My practice is all about Jesus and what he can do for you, and it's not me. Don't ever give me the glory and honor, because it isn't me, it's Jesus. The Holy Spirit's here with us. If he leaves, I'm going too. He's here in the room with us, and he'll work with us. And what we have to do is to work through these things and take care of the fear. And the fear issue is really a huge thing with folks. They really have problems because once you have anxiety, hear me clear, once you have anxiety, you probably will always have it. But you can control it, okay? And I know these are a lot of girls, but I got a lot of guys too that have the anxiety disorder. But why do therapists tell you to breathe, do those breathing exercises? Anybody have any idea? What's that do?
Slows down your adrenaline.
Excuse me?
Slows down your adrenaline
It
production.
does do that, but there's a reason it does that. It affects the parasympathetic nerves to your brain. So it's actually a scientific thing. If you teach these people how to breathe, they take a little short breath, and then they do it again, and then they count to 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And everything sort of goes back to normal. The parasympathetic nerves shut this down so the adrenaline doesn't go and the steroid doesn't go. That sounds like a simple thing. And some of these people are too far gone that they can't actually slow it down, so I had them get a rubber band, look at the second hand of their clock, talk to somebody, have somebody help them through it, because a lot of this develops into panic. Has anybody here ever had a panic attack? Oh, yes, you have. You have too, yeah.
Yes.
And what happens there is you start doing this and you can't, and now the CO2's building up in, and now you're gonna faint, or you're getting numb in your hands and your feet, and you're gonna pass out. So these are the things that you have to stop before it gets to that point. But as I said, anxiety disorder can be controlled. And I always love it when people I'm working with get it. They'll say, well, the other day, this really happened. Now, if a bear's chasing you, use all the adrenaline you can get and run. The fight or flight thing, run. Because that would be helpful to get away from that bear, yeah. Getting tired of me yet? Who said that? Write her name down, Paul. We talked about guilt and shame. You got that guilt and shame thing?
I have a question.
Sure.
At the risk of sounding stupid, you talked about this social media affair. What's that look like?
Okay, good question. It's never a stupid question because you didn't know the answer to it.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. What happens with men, a lot of times, and I'll get very down at it, is that maybe things aren't going well in the bedroom, okay? Or they're bored, or whatever. I've had women with this too, but it's mostly men. And they open up their phones, they go to, not TikTok, but the other one, help me.
Facebook.
Facebook.
No, the other
Instagram.
one. Twitter. I get Twitter, thank you. And things pop up. I know middle of the night, it's about 2 o'clock because I leave my phone on because one of my clients wants to call. And I got buzzed and I picked it up, opened it up, and looked at it, and there's a completely nude woman on my phone. So that's what they're doing, is they're sending this stuff to. So what happens now, the guys that I have, interesting enough, they know these women from previous times. They've been old girlfriends, schoolmates, whatever. And they're just harmlessly, I think I'll talk to Susie. I haven't talked to her for 10 years. So we find out Susie's divorced and not happy, and we find out things aren't so well in his bedroom. So they just talk back and forth, and now all of a sudden she's sending nude pictures. And some of them, I haven't had any of my guys meeting up with these girls. They're just sending pictures and going, and they do the Snapchat. I got it right?
Yeah,
Because that picture goes away, right?
yeah.
Boy, I'm getting smart. It goes away right away. So the wife doesn't have any proof, but she reads the messages, and that's enough proof. Did I answer your question?
You are answering my question. I guess I don't know enough about Snapchat, Twitter, and whatever you're talking about to
Yeah.
know how it works.
Well, these guys both have had some pornography issues with it. So, it's just, if things aren't right in the bedroom, when I have couples, and I I said to myself and the therapist that was working with me before she retired and went to her motorcycle, I said to her, I'm not taking any marriages, any couples, they're yours. She said, okay, that's fine. Well, she's not there anymore. So last week I got 4 couples, 4 different couples. Marriages are in trouble, deep trouble. And Satan is on the prowl. And this is where the churches need to step in. And I know you have good groups here and different things to help that out. And you can't help everybody, I know that. Everybody knows you can't help. And they have to be, wanted to be helped, and that's what I tell them first thing off. One of my first questions is, you know, how are things in the bedroom? Don't be specific, everything okay? And the guy will look and say, well, it could be better. That's usually his remarks. And she said, what? You know, that type of thing. So we back and forth. I said, well, let's not talk about that anymore. Let's go on. It gets a little bad. It gets a little volatile. So we try to keep that going too long. But it is something that that you have to find out, because once the communication and the bedroom stuff goes, then we got a real problem. We got to find the roots. I always describe problems, whether it be a marriage or a person, as a big tree, a hunking tree with lots of roots. And there's no way you're going to help an alcoholic or anybody with an addiction until you find that root. There's something that's caused this major problem. It's not, he didn't get up one morning and said, I'm going to be an alcoholic. He didn't do that. Or I woke up one morning and going to have an affair. So you got to find the root. And a lot of this goes back to when they were kids. And I didn't talk everything about this one gal that had the ADD and so on, but she had been raped once. She unfortunately had an abortion from that, and there was different things. So now you're dealing with 10, 12, 13 different things. And the thing of it is, when you're dealing with somebody that can't focus, when you're dealing with somebody that's majorly depressed, they're very difficult to do therapy with. So you almost have to get that started first, where you're sort of sitting there with somebody in fog. It's like the guy in marijuana comes in there, how you doing, dude? And I said, I'm not dude, I'm Spence. You know, get rid of your marijuana and then we'll work. But it's, yeah.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
So, example of a case study. Someone walks into you, how do you get from them walking in your office to knowing they need to go to Janie instead of medication or something else?
Well, that doesn't happen in one session. I usually will test them if it's something I can take care of. Are you talking about the demonic? Is that where you're hitting?
Yes.
Oh, I can tell that pretty quick. Although, what we have trouble with, and the psychiatrists have trouble with, is this person schizophrenic or does this person have a demon? I think that's what you were talking about, wasn't it?
Yeah.
I don't know. I've read all the books. It's very, very difficult. And we've been dealing with some people, Janie and I, and it's very difficult. So you've got to sort of treat both. You know, these people usually have been in the 7th floor multiple times or on multiple meds. I'd love to take them off their meds and see what I have, because some of this makes them really foggy, so on and so forth. But when they tell you that something is causing some problem somewhere, and they can feel this presence, now what you have to be careful of is with people that have Parkinson's disease, they hallucinate, they see things and they hear things. So, and this can even happen, kids in their 20s can have Parkinson's disease. Because I unfortunately had a kid that I sent to a neurologist thinking maybe he had, but I was more sure that he had some demonic problems. And they treated him for schizophrenia, and he ended up committing suicide. These people, they can tolerate so much. The human can, and then when the voices are telling them to hurt somebody, they don't want to hurt somebody, so they hurt themselves. And I've had a case of that. And you know, I always say to myself, is this something I can handle and keep doing what I'm doing? Because it does really touch your heart when you lose somebody. I had a man that left my office when I was practicing medicine, and I was treating him for different things, but depression was one, and I asked him how he's doing. And that's the other thing, when they start to tell you they're doing, man, I haven't done this, I'm really good. They have a plan, they're gonna do it. So a lot of times when they're that much better, and I said, what's going on with you? He says, I'm fine, see you later. Got this motorcycle and hit a truck. Yeah, and they said it was an accident, but I knew otherwise. So, can everybody see this picture? Yeah, right. You with the cataract, you can see it. See that picture? Anybody know what it is? Come on, you smart people with all your education.
Is it atoms?
You're gonna say it, aren't you?
Neuron or something.
Who said that? It's a neuron, yeah. Very good. That's a neuron, and that's what's carrying all these messages. You guys are sitting here, and you're looking at pictures, you're looking at a screen, you're looking at all these things. These neurons are picking all this stuff up. So you got billions of these. So just think about it. Anybody with issues with depression and anxiety, they've got all these messages in here. That's their life in here. That's what they've lived. And these neurons, what happens is, and this isn't scientific, so don't write this down, but this is my own. I think they get out of orbit. I don't think, what actually happens is they're not going through the different parts of the brain, and they're not getting nourished by the different chemicals and different things like that. But I say to my clients, I said, you have a neuron, it's out of orbit. And they sort of look at me like I'm crazy, but yeah, you've got a neuron that isn't functioning the way it should. So bottom line is, for you to be happy, you're going to have some cognitive therapy, and you're probably going to have to have some medication. Dopamine is huge this time of the year. How many of you like the dark and the cold and the snow? Too many back there. Well, your dopamine's going to get a little lower. That's what happens to us. When I was practicing medicine, I had a lot of people in October would call me up and say, Spence, I need my dopamine. I said, okay, no problem. So they would take it until probably March or April, and then they would stop it. I mean, it's just like a guy going in his car and it runs on empty and it stops. The dopamine is like that. It's a neuron too. There's a lot of different chemicals in the brain that I'd love to discuss with you, but we'd be here till 10:10, 10:30, so I won't do that. Yes?
Did I understand and write this down correctly that anxiety or depression can be chemical, and you would treat that, or you consider treating that with medicine, but negativity is more a habit?
Once you start the loop of anxiety, it's there. You get up in the morning and your loop starts. I know probably some of you dealt with that loop of anxiety, and you have to stop it. You have to ground yourself. Sometimes you need medication, you need cognitive therapy, whatever. So that's something that will stay there until it's treated. And some people go through that a lot of times of their lives, their whole lives. They just think that's them. This is just me. Depression is the type of thing that when you treat somebody with an antidepressant, the anxiety usually gets better. Usually. Lexapro is one of the ones that is really good for anxiety and depression. My go-to medicine, we want to talk about medicine a little bit, is Prozac. Prozac's been around from the time I started practicing medicine, because we used to have Thorazine and all that crappy stuff that people just got really weird. Some of them were weird anyway, but Thorazine made them a lot weirder. But Prozac is something that we use for OCD. It's really good for OCD. It's good for the complex sexual trauma. It's good for that. And, you know, if it doesn't fit, then you get another SSRI. That's what we call them. Zoloft is one of those. I use a lot of Zoloft. Lexapro, Celexa. You know, you can go down through all kinds. Now, the newer ones that come out are really good, but nobody can afford them. I'm trying to think of some of their names. But the thing with Prozac and Lexapro is along the way into the brain, they're hitting other receptors. So you're getting sexual dysfunction, you're getting diarrhea, you're getting different things. But these newer ones go right to that receptor that it needs to go to. So if you can afford $400 a month, go for it. It's good stuff. It's 7:08. You want me to stop?
I have a question. You
Sure.
ask, I guess I'd like to ask the group, how do you know when someone you're working with should be referred to Spence?
Yeah.
We'll turn it around. How do you know? I guess
Well, they're
you don't
talkers,
know.
aren't they?
Maybe they don't know, huh?
Maybe I scared them.
If
Well,
you go through,
when we see a problem and we do the things that we know to do and nothing changes, I think that's when we start saying, is there a possibility that this has a medical edge to it that we need to look into? I mean, we're listening to you talking about all these medical things, and I think you do the medical things, and if that doesn't work, then you maybe start looking toward the spiritual end and say, maybe we need to send it to Janie. And I think it's kind of the flip of that for us. We do what we know and what we're trained and gifted to do. And if that's not working, then we come to the place of saying, maybe this is something physical or chemical.
I would agree with that. That's the determination that I use. Okay, questions. I know we asked you to come in with questions. Questions you have for Spence?
You've been a good audience. Thank you
You
very
said
much.
our brain doesn't, but isn't fully developed till you're 22. Well, how's come the education, all these schools, academics are saying kids should change their gender, they can change their gender, they can be, aren't they smart enough to know that then? Huh? I won't get you started on.
I'll talk to you later. That's a very good question. That's an excellent question. So you could tell your 7 or 8-year-old, go over to that bridge and jump off of it. See how it feels when you hit the bottom. Parents are doing this. They're saying, you're not really a boy, you're a girl. You're not really a girl, you're a boy. Until these kids are 18, this is all on the parents. Any of this stuff that's going on is on the parents. And I know what some of these homes look like. It's awful. They just don't have good parenting. There may be one there. Sometimes there's not one there at all half the time, and one of the sisters is raising the kids. But those type of things should not be put on a kid because he's just going to do what the parent says. And that's usually what you get with that. And I tell you, I don't know where that's all gone, but I can see where that's all gone. We shouldn't be surprised. I listened to David Jeremiah the other day. He's one of my favorites, but he wanted to give us the message that we're in a marathon, but we're in the last 6 miles of this marathon. And we better start working. We better get these people into heaven because we're in the last 6 miles and we don't have a lot of time. That's why I appreciate all these people right here. These are the people. I can only see a few people, but there's a lot of these people. I wish I had these people in our church, my goodness, to help because, sometimes I get a little frustrated because, every now and then somebody will come up and say, well, can I help or can I do whatever? Yeah, you can help. What can I do? I can't do that. I know education is really the thing that we need. And education, some of the stuff I've given you, you don't have to know that. That's just my stuff. I've been in medicine and let's see, I was an x-ray tech for 10 years, I was a PA for 40 years, I've done this for 10 years, so that's a lot of years. So if you need an x-ray, I can do an x-ray. If you need a physical, I can do a physical, and if you need psychology stuff, I can do that too. No, Ted.
Ted wants his.
Not going there. But, I've lived a lot of years, and I've learned a lot of things, and Janie's taught me things. Janie and Arden have taught me things because the demonic is just sort of, I sort of step back and say, this isn't my gifting. I help out with it. And Janie and I've, done some people that we've sort of done the team approach on because trying to decide whether they have a demonic stuff going on or whether they have a schizophrenia or a mental illness of some kind is the most difficult thing. And the old Satan can get in there and he can make it look like this and he can make it look like that. And these are the people that will say, I don't know if I really have my salvation anymore. I don't know if I'm saved. I don't know where I'm going. You know, listen to Jesus.
Other questions?
Yes, ma'am. Just a minute.
So I have a bunch of questions, but I'll start out with, can you tell us a little bit about programming? How would you know if someone is in a program?
That's interesting. I'm glad you asked that. I worked with a Christian psychologist. I still work with him a little bit. But he taught me a lot about programming, and I in no way could start doing that. That's really back in, I'd say back in the early 2000s, there was 13 people in the United States that I know of that were doing deprogramming. And I know I've got people with programming. For instance, when you go into the service and you're this meek, mild little person, they're going to teach you how to kill. That's programming. You've got to teach you how to kill, because if you're going overseas, you've got to learn how to shoot a gun. But this is at a different level. This a lot of times is a sexual thing for control and different things. Programming can lead you to do things that you wouldn't normally do. And then you get into multi-personality disorders, and that's another thing that I don't talk a lot about because you don't see a lot of it. It's out there, I'm sure. But programming is something that you have to get into the unconscious mind to find it. And you talk about roots. I was working with him with a lady that was in her 70s that was sexually abused by her dad. And this woman was one of the angriest people you'd ever want to meet. And we found out through the unconscious mind that this is the reason she was angry, but she didn't know it. And that unconscious mind revealed that. And they're not hypnotized. You know, it's like I'm talking with you. And what you do is you have to clear the room. You have to, because this is something that really is, it's very spiritual. I had trouble believing it at first. And then I saw some things that just opened my eyes. It's no way that that person could have known that if we hadn't gone to the unconscious mind. Does that answer your question?
Well, yeah, but now, like, how do you get to the unconscious mind? Is it you just ask the Holy Spirit to take them there? Because it's kind of what we do with inner healing, but that sounds kind of the same, but...
The way he was showing me and trying to teach me, I wasn't a very good student because I knew I didn't want to go there, because you can really hurt people with that. You can really cause damage, and you're dealing with the unconscious mind. And then when you're dealing with the unconscious mind, you're usually dealing with parts. Now, what I do with some of my women that have been abused or whatever is find out the age and then have them talk to their 4 or 5 year old or 6 or 7 year old and have them start a conversation, sit down and color with them or do whatever. Because if you get this child, this part of yours, to listen to you, then that's when he could get a lot of information from the unconscious mind.
Okay, makes sense.
And I could talk for 3 hours on this. I understand it, I just don't do it. But anyway, yeah. Somebody else have a question?
Spence, we meet a lot of people that have bipolar. Talk to me about what it looks like to see someone's bipolar, and what can we do as the average person to help that out, if we can.
Well, I always have said, if I'm trying to find bipolar, it takes 8 sessions before I even suggest it, and then I usually send them somewhere to get a definite diagnosis. When you diagnose somebody with that, they're labeled. And a lot of them aren't. Some of them aren't.
That's where I was trying to get to.
Yeah. Bipolar, you watch them through a manic phase, and you don't follow these people around. I had one that I knew was bipolar after she went and bought a new Chevy, and they didn't have money to buy a used Ford. So I said to her, sorry, poor people. What are you going to do with that new car when your husband finds out you bought a new car? And she said, oh, he'll love it. You should come out and look at it. It's beautiful. And I said, you guys don't have the money to do this. She said, oh, we'll work at it. But she had all that she would be very, very depressed. But I found her in a manic phase. She went off a lady. She went on a Chevy. It's a beautiful Chevy. Yeah. So it takes about 8 sessions, and I'm always concerned, even when I send them to psychiatrists, is 2 or 3 sessions and they label them as bipolar. You've got to have a good history. If you have a family history of it, suspect it. That's right up top. If they're extremely depressed and then the next time you see them they're sort of joyful as they get on medication, you probably got something there. But you got to realize that a lot of people, when all of us are up and down. You know, sometimes we have good days, sometimes we have bad days. But bipolar is bipolar 1, bipolar 2, rapid cycling, manic, psychosis. You got all this stuff going on with these people. And I'll tell you, when they start taking medicine and they get on the right medicine, they're like you and me. Well, not like me, not like you. Did that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay. Yes, ma'am.
Is it true that as a child you can go through traumas and that your brain is somewhat protected, but as you grow older, there's like some of that becomes diminished and you begin to relive some of that again? Is there truth to that? Because
That's
I
a
think
word.
I experienced
Yes, and
that.
that's a good question. And let me give you an example that maybe isn't exactly like what you're speaking to, but for some reason, when females start to get through menopause and their hormones start to change, they start to see things that they've never seen before.
Yeah.
You're nodding your head.
I am.
Yeah. And nobody's ever explained it really well to me, other than it must be the hormonal change. And when that hormonal changes, then it sort of opens up some things. But yeah, you're right, exactly what you said. The brain, and a lot of times, I think this is a God thing. I think God
It is a
protects
God
us
thing.
from really bad things until we get somewhere where we can deal with it. Because I'm just amazed at some of the stuff that comes out sometimes in my sessions, some of the horrible, awesome things that comes out. And God protected them through this until they were old enough to be able to deal with what they're telling me. I mean, it's almost like a light switch, and oh my goodness, is that true? I mean, I've had people say, do you think I was raped? Do you think I was this? I had this trauma. Do you think this is true? So then you have to go back through history, and then hopefully mom and dad can help us out, or mom and dad are still living, or if they're adult or whatever. But that's a good question. Yeah. I don't believe my voice held out.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
And, for us, we have to remember that most of the people who are coming to us are coming at some point in their life where they realize they need help, but they're not necessarily have a mental illness that they are struggling with. We need to be able to discern when it is a referral for mental health. Okay. So we deal with the spiritual component of all of this, as you all know. And when you're talking about depression, I was probably depressed my whole life, I was told, after the fact. But when I was doing my work and I was dealing with unforgiveness, and it was in my living room, I was on my knees forgiving my parents, and I felt something literally come out of my skin. And I didn't know what that was until later. I found out what it was. A spirit of depression, right? So we can open ourselves up to spirits of depression, spirits of anxiety. That's the kind of stuff that we look for and deal with in the ministry. Make sense?
And that's where your journaling comes in. Because if they start to journal, sometimes some of this past will come out in their journaling. Just one more thing is, the reason you journal is because you're putting it down here, and your brain has time to look at it. When you're trying to think things up here, and you're already depressed or anxious, there's no way you're going to figure things out. It has to get down in black and white.
So encourage the folks you work with to be journaling and writing some of this stuff down. I know a lot of us do that as well. Any other questions?